team mentality. But you have to think about the Constitution and this whole rule of law. People talk about upholding the rule of law, like a speed limit when you're driving down the street, right? The sign can say 35 miles an hour, but you'll blow through it and go 45 or 50 if there's no ticket. Or one day you do it and there's a machine hiding in the bushes and you get that ticket in the mail, and then everyone's going to slow down the next time after getting that ticket. That's really why this isn't so much political. If you swapped out Donald Trump and you put a Democrat or you put some other person that maybe you're not that excited about in that position, you have to understand, if there are no tickets for speeding through the Constitution becomes irrelevant. That's why the implications are so profound, not just for Donald Trump, who of course this is an extremely difficult day for him and his family. It's humiliating. He could actually in theory, go to jail. That's the difference between a criminal case and a civil case. That's just money. This is talking about your liberty. But it really is about saying, you know what, the Constitution matters in this country. We want there to be consequences for blowing through some of the stop signs.
Let's talk about pardons. Does that play a role in all of this? Is that an option for him? And if so, why in a case like this?
Yeah, the pardon power is this strange thing that actually dates back to common law monarchies, even before that. The original pardon was Barabbas and Jesus, right? Before the crucifixion. And the theory is really that the person in charge, the governor, not in Georgia, or the president, should be able to have mercy for certain people. That it's really a mercy lever, that the criminal justice system is so unfair for some people that you should just sort of waive that process. And in common law England, there weren't a lot of rules for criminal defendants. The other use of pardons is for just after a war, or just sort of make some peace. We saw this with Gerald Ford and President Nixon. So it's sort of looming out there as this weird arcane kind of historical artifact. But for Donald Trump, at the federal level, those two huge cases, if he's president again, there are very few limits on the constitutional pardon power. He can make those go away. This one, not so much, which is, I think, why this is, for lots of reasons, such a heavy prospect for the former president.
And let's talk about the bigger implications on the Constitution. What are they?
Well, the Constitution, again, I like to talk about common law England. And if you imagine a king, the idea is the power comes from God, and it's like a triangle like this. And the king hands out favors. In America, it's the opposite. The triangle is upside down. The power comes from the people, and then it goes to our elected officials. So I think we've gotten that a little bit mixed up in the last few years, the idea being that somehow there's some entitlement for certain people to have power. I really think we need to see accountability for something this serious. Disruption of the peaceful transition of power from one president to another. People died on that day. A lot of people were injured, potentially tampering with voting machines, filing fake slates of electors, trying to dupe the United States Congress, to dupe secretaries of state, to basically dupe the voters. If we say thumbs up, that's no problem for certain people, then we're moving that triangle again, the upside triangle, where we're the boss. We're flipping that, and we're creating something that looks more like an unlimited monarchy, where in theory the power came from God. The power didn't come from the people. That's the innovation of the framers of the United States Constitution. The people are the ones in charge. And I really think these efforts by various prosecutors at various levels, they're not all answering to the same one superior, except to the extent to which it's functioning as a democracy, and their bosses are the United States citizenry.
The U.S. Constitution and the legal system at work. Thank you so much, Kim. The former president facing 13 state charges. You can see there live images from his motorcade as the former president heads back to the airport to then make his way back to New Jersey. I'm just going to read off some of the charges that he is facing. Former President Trump is facing conspiracy to commit filing false documents, false statements in writing, solicitation of violation of oath by public officer, and many more. 13 state charges in total. If you are just joining us, former President Donald Trump has been booked and released from the Fulton County Jail. That is from the sheriff's office. A senior advisor to the former president tells ABC News that a mugshot was taken of Trump moments after entering the Fulton County Jail. The motorcade right now is on the way to the airport where he will board his private plane and head back to Bedminster, New Jersey. Now, in this case, the president's own words being used against him. Take a listen.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find. We had continued to look. We investigated, like I just shared the numbers with you. There were no votes to find. That was an accurate count that had been certified.
Let's go back to John Katko, an ABC News contributor, as well as a former congressman and former assistant U.S. attorney. John, all of this comes as the 8 other candidates for the Republican nomination squared off last night on stage without the former president, without Trump. Each one of them was asked if they would still support Trump if convicted. Take a listen.
You all signed a pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee. If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would. Just so just to be clear, Governor Christie, you were kind of late to the game there, but you raised your hand.
No, I'm doing this. Look, I'm doing this.
I know you didn't.
Go up. No, come. Look, here's the bottom line. Someone's got to stop normalizing this conduct. Okay? Now whether or not you believe that the criminal charges are right or wrong, the conduct is beneath the office of President of the United States.
John, what did you make of that last night?
Well, I think his comments are correct. I think that there's a remarkable phenomenon going on here with respect to this president where he can do, former president, he can do no wrong in the eyes of his supporters. And his comment when he was on the election trail way back when he said I could kill someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and I'd still have the support of all these people, it's probably right to some extent. But I do think that at some point there's part of that base that is going to start rethinking their options. And what last night provided us was a glimpse into someone who might be able to fill that vacuum. And quite frankly, the bench is pretty deep on the Republican side, and I think that there's several that could fill that vacuum. They're nowhere near being able to achieve that goal, but it is certainly still a possibility with all this floating over the former president's head. And like I said earlier, mugshots sometimes have a profound impact on the community when they see it, and that might be something that gets people to start thinking a different manner as well, because it makes it much more real seeing someone's mugshot. So there's a lot more to go here, and I think this election is far from over. And I remember back in 2015, someone by the name of Donald Trump was in the single digits at this time and caught fire later on and became a juggernaut. So you never know. We're in very, very uncharted territories here. And being the first ex-president in the history of our great country, over 250 years, that has been charged with a crime, let alone multiple crimes. So there's a long way to go. And last night was probably a necessary step in that direction.
We certainly do have a long way to go, but a historic night there in Fulton County, Georgia. We're looking at live images, John, of the former president's motorcade. I want to bring in John Santucci. John, the president is on his way back to the airport right now. And I understand you have some reporting about how Trump was able to be processed that quickly?
Yeah, Stephanie, my understanding is that in order to speed up this process, former President Trump was allowed to self-report his height and weight. That is different than any other of the 18 defendants that were charged alongside Trump. They had to go through the normal process, if you will, for surrendering at the Fulton County Jail. But Donald Trump, in order to get him in and out as quickly as possible, I am told was able to self-report those details just to speed up the process. Obviously, having Donald Trump there, we saw that motorcade basically take over the jail and the streets surrounding it. Any way to get him in and out, that was definitely the goal, not only for the Fulton County Sheriff, but also the Secret Service, Stephanie.
And John, I would imagine after taking that mugshot and seeing that mugshot, the severity of the charges has to sink in. What are you hearing about the former president's mood tonight, if you're hearing about it at all?
Many people at the moment waiting to get back to the aircraft with Donald Trump. I don't believe they've actually connected with him, is my understanding, just yet, Stephanie. And you mentioned seeing that mugshot. I'm unclear, Stephanie, if Donald Trump has actually seen the mugshot yet. It's my understanding his aides will at some point get the mugshot. I don't believe they have it yet, based on the folks that I'm speaking to in real time. But you've got to imagine that Donald Trump, who's always very attentive to detail, always wants to make sure he looks great, always wants to review a photo. That's just not the way things work. I'd be surprised if they spun the monitor around. So, Mr. President, what do you think? Should we take it again? That is something that Donald Trump probably wanted. I'm not sure he got that tonight, Stephanie.
Probably not. Thank you, John. Let's check in again with Aaron Katersky. Aaron, let's talk about what just happened to the former president inside that jail. What were those moments like for you as you stand out there outside the jail?
The former president was in and out of this jail, Stephanie, in under a half an hour. And in that time, he was booked and processed, meaning his height and weight were recorded. As John notes, that was entered by his team earlier than planned. And then he was fingerprinted and his first mugshot was taken. The whole process did not last very long, certainly a lot faster than the usual criminal defendant here, but he went through all the steps. And then as his motorcade left, Stephanie, it appeared that the former president flashed a thumbs up on his way back to the airport.
And Aaron, as you know, this has been a marathon week in Fulton County following the indictment of the former president and 18 others, as the defendants have been negotiating their bonds, surrendering and challenging the case in court. Now, we have some of the pre-negotiated bond packages here for Rudy Giuliani, $150,000. And we understand the former president had to post a $200,000 bail. We're learning about how he went about getting some of that money. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
The former president was required to post bond the first time in all 4 of his criminal prosecutions that he's been asked to post bond. And here in Georgia, it was required that he put up 10%. And to do that, we're told he worked with a local bail bondsman to secure the money, get it posted before he was ultimately released. That must have been prearranged because, again, he wasn't in there very long. Other defendants have been able to also prearrange the terms of their bond, except one. There is one defendant, Floyd is his name, who was accused of coming here and trying to strong-arm one of the poll workers who had been falsely accused of stealing ballots. He did not prearrange his bond, so he's spending the night here at the Fulton County Jail.
Absolutely incredible. Aaron, thank you. Let's bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, after 4 indictments and now this 4th surrender by a former U.S. president, what are your initial reactions to what we just witnessed?
Well, none of this is supposed to happen. You're not supposed to see a former president walking into a jail as a criminal defendant. That's the thing that's striking. And also, I would use the word severe. When you go into a jail, and I have had the unfortunate ability because of my job to go into jails, they're not pleasant places at all. And this particular jail that former President Trump went into has a notorious reputation for being poorly run, dangerous, and quite frankly, just disgusting. And so the word severity comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is that the former president has now been accused by 4 different prosecutors, in 4 different cases has been accused of criminal acts. Again, just extraordinary. You have the prosecutor in New York. You have the special counsel with 2 separate cases targeting the president. And now you have the Fulton County DA targeting a former president of the United States, basically accusing him of crimes. Now, We'll have to see if this case can be won in court by the prosecutors. But it's not lost on any of us. And there's a feeling of this becoming routine to some degree because this is the fourth time that we've seen it. But on the other hand, when you really think about what is taking place, we may, in a few weeks' time, in a live broadcast, see a former president at an arraignment live, the first time the world would ever see a former president in court live.
Absolutely historic, Pierre. You said it. Extraordinary that we are witnessing this. A historic night indeed. Let's bring back in former Georgia prosecutor Chris Timmons. Chris, we know the former president's bond agreement has a provision against making any direct or indirect threats toward co-defendants or witnesses. How closely will authorities be watching in Georgia, watching him after this appearance today? And I just briefly want to mention that we are now watching the former president's motorcade make its way to the tarmac there in Georgia. But what do you make of this?
So, I mean, it doesn't have to be the prosecutors watching it. It's the entire world media that's watching Donald Trump, waiting for him to put something on Truth Social or to say something. And so the prosecution is going to be aware the second that he does it. The question is, are they going to file a motion to revoke his bond? So the process is you have what could be an alleged violation of the bond. The state files a motion to revoke the bond. The judge sets a hearing where the defendant is present. The state has to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant has violated his bond condition. And if they prove that, then he goes either back into jail or maybe house arrest, but he'll be confined in some way.
And that would be another incredible and remarkable moment. Right now, we're watching live images as the former president is stepping out of the motorcade. You can see the camera moving there just a bit. Now, I want to ask you, we know that the former president has had so many different lawyers working for him and had another legal shakeup just today. What do you make of bringing in a new defense attorney on the day of his surrender?
So it's interesting. I mean, Jennifer Little, who's the attorney that's staying on, actually, I've known her for years. When she was a law student in 2004, she was my intern, believe it or not, at a prosecution office. But he's got Jennifer Little for some continuity. It's interesting that Drew Finling went away and that he brought in Steve Sadow. My guess would be, without knowing for sure, is that Finling was a little low key for the president. Steve Sadow is the type of lawyer who likes to pound his chest, talk about how he's going to destroy you in court. And I think that might be what the former president is looking for, is a chest pounder, somebody who's going to threaten. Steve Sadow does martial arts as one of his hobbies. If you go to lunch with Steve, he's got a very big ego. The entire lunch will be spent talking about Steve Sadow. So that really interesting thing here is going to be the tension that's going to be between two people who want the spotlight. And so that's my only concern. I would be concerned that the former president might fire Mr. Sadow because he doesn't want to share the spotlight or even be upstage.
Let's talk about how expensive this can get. There's a lot of money involved in all of this. We know Rudy Giuliani was requesting some of his fees to be paid, and the former president is now defending himself in 4 cases. We know the legal bills have to be mounting up. Can you give us a sense for just how expensive this type of representation can be?
So I actually had in a RICO case that I prosecuted that was only going to go to trial for a month, but given the ramp up on a RICO case, probably 9 months to prepare for, one of the defense attorneys indicated in open court that it was going to be approximately $1 million just for him. So in this particular case, where you're talking about a trial where jury selection is going to last a long time, looking at the YSL or Young Thug case here, which started in January and is still ongoing with regard to jury selection, this is going to be a long jury selection. This is going to be a long trial. So what you're saying to an attorney is you've got to shut down your entire practice. You can't handle any other cases during the next year or two. And so when they're setting the amount, and then it's the amount that not only that they're taking home, but also the amount to pay rent, to pay their staff, et cetera, it's probably $1 million or $2 million in fees when you get down to it, at the very least.
An expensive and lengthy process. Thank you so much, Chris. Let's go to ABC's Olivia Rubin now. The president, Olivia, is about to get on his plane, heading back to New Jersey. Can you tell us a little bit about what may be happening next?
Well, the former president is now leaving Atlanta, but really the case is just getting underway here in earnest with multiple dates already set. It's moving.
Sorry, Olivia, we're going to interrupt you for just a second. The former
An election, you should be able to challenge an election. I thought the election was a rigged election, a stolen election, and I should have every right to do that. As you know, you have many people that you've been watching over the years do the same thing, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Stacey Abrams or many others. When you have that great freedom to challenge, you have to be able to, otherwise you're going to have very dishonest elections. What has taken place here is a travesty of justice. We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. And everybody knows it. I've never had such support. And that goes with the other ones too. What they're doing is election interference. They're trying to interfere with an election. There's never been anything like it in our country before. This is their way of campaigning. And this is one instance, but you have 3 other instances. It's election interference. So I want to thank you for being here. We did nothing wrong at all. And we have every right, every single right to challenge an election that we think is dishonest, that we think it's very dishonest. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you very soon. Thank you very much.
I want to bring in John Santucci. You heard the president there calling the 2020 election rigged again. What do you make of those comments?
Comments we're going to hear every day for the next year plus. That is the Donald Trump campaign slogan. Obviously, he goes out there and says, "Make America Great Again," but it's quickly followed by rigged, stolen election. And that is really the Donald Trump mantra right now. It's shocking that, elections are about moving things forward. Donald Trump is still living in November 2020, and we know that is something that still sticks with him. And clearly seeing Donald Trump come to cameras and defending himself, but nevertheless looking backwards, not looking forward to, we're going to beat this case, whatever else. I mean, he can't let it go. And it jives very much, Stephanie, what I was being told on January 6, 2021, as people were telling me in real time, he just still can't believe and accept the fact he lost. Nearly 2.5 years later, that sentiment quite clearly, based on those remarks, still exists front and center for Donald Trump.
They certainly do. I want to check in with Olivia Rubin now. Olivia, you heard the president there once again calling the 2020 election rigged, thanking his supporters, but also saying that he did nothing wrong, also bringing up Hillary Clinton, Stacey Abrams. We know there's no evidence to what he is saying, that it is not true, but still repeating those same lines, saying that it was a stolen election, despite there being no evidence. Olivia, what do you make of all of this?
Well, we also heard the former president say, Stephanie, something that's very key that we've heard from him in relation to all of the election cases, which is that he had a right to challenge the election, which he thought had fraud in it. And that is a defense that we have started to hear emerge from multiple of the defendants in this case who have spoken thus far. You think about Rudy Giuliani. When he came to surrender at the jail yesterday, he said, "I had every right to give the president advice as an attorney." That's the same defense that we heard from John Eastman when he came to the jail. So far, what we are hearing from these defendants as they are coming to surrender is sort of this similar line that they had the right to challenge the election because they thought it was fraudulent. So now it will be on the prosecutors to show that that was actually criminal conduct, but a clear sort of solid line drawn now between the former president and many of his closest allies that are ensnared in this investigation, that they are clearly publicly on the same page with this.
They certainly seem to be. Olivia, thank you so much. Again, a reminder to our viewers that despite what the president said just a few moments ago, there has been no evidence to prove his claim that there was any election irregularities that would have changed the result of the election. I want to bring in Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas. Pierre, you just heard the president there a few moments ago, sticking with the same lines, defending himself, but also saying that the election, despite there being no evidence, was stolen. What do you make of it?
Well, Stephanie, here's the bottom line. One of the main accusations by the Fulton County prosecutor and the special counsel is that former President Trump had every right to litigate his claim that the election was rigged. There were 61 court cases. He lost every one of them. And the reason why he lost every one of them, based on the facts, is that there simply was not wide-scale election fraud. It does not exist. It did not exist, and certainly not enough to overturn the election. Those are just facts. And what this case boils down to is Once that became known to he and the people around him, the question is, did their actions then morph into something that was illegal? By going to the vice president and saying, stop the certification of Joe Biden. That's an official proceeding which the Constitution allows for the selection of the president. Did it morph into something that was illegal? But this whole notion of a rigged election, I think we owe it to our viewers to just make it clear at every turn, at every chance where the election was checked. The bottom line is has been viewed as one of the safest, most secure elections in U.S. history. And Republican officials, remember, Mr. Raffensperger is a Republican official. That's who he was calling, asking for 11,780 votes. And these officials in Michigan, in the various battleground states, Arizona, told the president and his people around him, you lost the election, sir.
Pierre Thomas for us in Washington. Thank you so much, Pierre. I want to bring in Asha Rangappa, an ABC News legal contributor and former associate dean of the Yale Law School. Asha, everyone is going to be waiting for this mugshot of the former president, but can you put it into context for us, the significance of an image like this? We know it's extraordinary and it's historic, but talk about the significance and which, I mean, this hasn't existed before. We haven't seen this before.
No, when you look back historically to, for example, former President Richard Nixon, and when President Ford pardoned him, I mean, one of the calculations that President Ford took into account was the trauma and the, humiliation basically for the country as a whole to watch a former president go through the process of being criminally prosecuted. That was one of the considerations that he took into account. And we now see why. I mean, it's, we've now gone through this 3 times. This is the 4th time. But this will be much more powerful because we are going to have that very iconic image that we know from cultural and, TV and all of these different areas of what it means for someone to actually be a part of the criminal justice system. And this is, I think, it's a low for the country, I think, not something that we should be proud of, at least to the extent that this is happening, though, it does emphasize that no one is above the law.
And in speaking with John Santucci, we heard from him earlier about the mugshot and how it would likely be used to try and promote the former president as he moves toward this next election. I want to hear your take on the legal shakeup that took place today with Trump's legal team. What does it say about the case of an indicted individual when they change their legal representation the same day of their surrender?
Well, with former President Trump, it's really hard to know. We saw this through his administration. We just saw him getting rid of people and bringing people in. And since he has encountered all of these legal difficulties, he's cycled through a number of different lawyers. So it's not always clear what is driving it. Is he asking them to do things that they don't want to do? Does he just want someone who, has more star power? I mean, we don't know. I will say that from what I understand, the lawyer that he's hired, and in fact, the one that he let go, are highly reputable. So he has very good counsel, and he really needs that in this kind of complex criminal prosecution. I think the challenge is he going to listen to their counsel? And I think that the problem with Trump that we've seen over the years is that he's a terrible client. I think as a lawyer, he must be a very frustrating client because he doesn't always follow, I think, your standard legal advice, for example, to remain silent. And we'll just, I guess, have to see how long this particular lawyer will last. But I think in this case, at least, as opposed to the people that he's been indicted with, many of whom are his former lawyers, this person that he's hired does seem to be very good for at least the substance of this case.
And Asha, I want to talk about the bond restrictions, but before we do that, I do want to remind our viewers that we are looking at live images right now as the former president's plane takes off from Atlanta to Bedminster. This is moments after being booked and released there at the Fulton County Jail. Now, Asha, talk about the bond restrictions the former president is facing, specifically not threatening witnesses or co-defendants. We know that he does have a tendency to lash out on various platforms. Do you see this as a significant risk?
I do see this as a significant risk, especially in this particular case, because from what I can tell from DA Fani Willis, she's not playing around. And I don't think that she is going to stand for any kind of threats to her, to the judges, to the courthouse, to the personnel, to witnesses. And this is just a fine line that Trump has walked. I mean, we can go back to the Mueller investigation, where that report that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, provided had instances of interfering and dangling pardons to witnesses. In the January 6th hearing, we had indications that through intermediaries, he was trying to influence witnesses. We've had things that he said on, as you said, social media platforms. So again, going back to what I said before, will he listen to his lawyers? Will he be able to rein in his natural tendencies? Because now, very much different than when he was president, or even before 6 months ago, he's now under the jurisdiction of a court, and there are consequences to not following the rules that are imposed upon him by the judicial system.
Right, and everyone will be watching. Thank you so much, Asha. We are, again, looking at live images of the former president's plane about to take off. It is taxiing right now from Atlanta, Georgia, taking off to Bedminster, New Jersey. Just about a half hour ago, the former president was booked at the Fulton County Jail, indicted for a fourth time. I want to check in again with Aaron Katersky, who is there in Georgia, outside the Fulton County Jail, where security has been tight all day, as we can imagine. Aaron, we just heard those comments from President Trump before he boarded his plane. Could those comments violate the bail at all?
Well, according to his bond agreement, the former president is not supposed to make any incendiary comments. He's not supposed to make any threats. That includes on social media, which was a special caveat just for him. None of his co-defendants have that as part of their bond agreement. But he is not supposed to make comments that could be perceived as threatening any witness, any co-defendant, or anyone in the community. And perhaps the comments he made may not be violative of that. But you hear some of the rhetoric start to increase when he starts talking about the Democrats or his political opponents or the prosecutor. And so I think that the judge certainly is going to be listening carefully to what the former president says. But there is no precedent for how to really police this. It's going to be up to the judge's discretion whether to revoke his bond. And that would be, of course, uncharted territory, like so much of this already is, Stephanie. The first time the former president of the United States has ever been asked to post bond, first time for former President Trump. He's been asked to be booked at a jail as opposed to the courts. He did not have to enter a plea in court right away. He's supposed to come back in 2 weeks' time for that, although the judge is still arranging the arraignments. And we think this may, Stephanie, be the first time a United States Secret Service motorcade has ever been within the confines of a state jail. Because why else would a Secret Service motorcade have to be within the confines of a state jail? So much of this is unusual, and it all played out today over roughly a half hour's time.
Very unusual indeed, Aaron. Historic. Prior to Trump, no former or current president had ever been indicted. We're looking at live images now of the former president's plane about to take off there from Georgia, headed to New Jersey. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor Kim Whaley. I also want to get your impression of those comments made by the former president there on the tarmac, where he was repeating the lie that the election was stolen moments after being booked on these election-related charges. So we're not seeing any kind of remorse for his actions 2 years ago.
Well, there's two things going on there. One is this defense that I think we're going to see that there is no criminal intent in both the federal case in DC and this one, because he really believed that the election was stolen. But I also think it's potentially trying to dupe and confuse voters. Because let's be clear here, the allegations aren't that he just in good faith tried to challenge the election results. The allegations are that there were slates of fake electors. There were lies on paper that were submitted to courts submitted to secretaries of state, that there were election workers that were harassed, that there were voting machines that might have been tampered with, not all by Donald Trump, but in this broader enterprise. And so in a way, the only election interference that's on the table, the only potential evidence of election interference that's on the table is by Donald Trump, not by the people and the many thousands of Americans that came out to support the 2020 election and to run the election at the local level. That's really how this goes. They're not the ones that committed election interference. It's actually across these two cases, the two relating to January 6th, it's Donald Trump and the people around him. And so this is, you know, a psychologist would say this is classic gaslighting, right? You punch someone in the face and say, look what you did to my hand. It's kind of creating this impression, oh, let's go back to election interference. It was a rigged election, when actually that's what these cases are about, that there was an attempt by Donald Trump and others to actually rig or distort or change the election result. And that's really, really very serious for American democracy. And that's why I think these cases, regardless of where you are politically, have to move forward. So I think it's a very deft political move on the part of the president, in addition to setting up this defense that it was empty, empty heart, empty mind. I was just doing my best to do my duty as president.
And just to mention some of those false claims, the former president claimed there were 5,000 dead voters. He seemed to be obsessed with Georgia, obsessed with a suitcase full of ballots, saying that those existed, obsessed with poll workers, as you mentioned earlier, a mother and daughter who were working as poll workers, local community. They were targeted and harassed. And after hearing the former president just moments ago say the election was stolen, he did nothing wrong, like you said, just kind of living in this deaf world. What do you think about his co-defendants? Do you think they're on board, that they believe the same claims, the same thing that we just heard him say a few moments ago?
Listen, just think about the people whose lives are shattered and destroyed by this. Not just the people that were on January 6th, the Capitol police officers, several of whom died by suicide afterwards. There was actually a MAGA supporter that perished that day. There were many people that had serious physical, long-term, and psychological injuries. Then you have these various, co-defendants, the alleged co-conspirators in the January 6th case, their lives, their families, their financial situation, their futures, severely impacted, in addition to not just the two people that are named or identified as being harassed, but their harassment against poll workers across the country. Again, regular citizens, regular Americans, our friends and our neighbors. So Donald Trump is no victim here. And I think the narrative sometimes gets distorted when this has been a catastrophe of epic proportions for a lot of well-meaning Americans.
Let's talk about the RICO and let's break that down for folks that may not be familiar with it. What is RICO and how is it different from the 3 conspiracy charges in the federal January 6th case?
Yeah, so there's, I think, 3 tiers of these kinds of crimes. One is, you sort of, again, punch someone in the face. You did the crime. That would be like a basic assault. We don't see that here. Then you might have a conspiracy, which is the next level, and there are 3 counts in the January 6th case. That's a meeting of the minds, 2 people agreeing to violate a law and then taking a step in furtherance of that agreement. You don't actually have to cross the threshold, you just have to take a step. RICO is even more broad if you were to zoom out into the stars, right? And you don't have to have a big agreement between all these 19 people to sit down and say, let's take steps, like in a typical conspiracy. Let's agree to thwart the outcome of the 2020 election. Instead, you have to have basically various acts in tandem within a certain period of time. And the prosecutors have to show there's an enterprise that is almost like a gang or like typically a mafia type situation where they're all working in tandem towards a common goal. So you could be swept up in a RICO charge based on someone else's conduct, even if you didn't sit and agree to do it. So it's probably harder to defend. I mean, like your other guests have much more experience in the defense, but it's a sweeping charge, and it's one that allows the government to capture many people in this larger story of a common enterprise or a common idea. That's the big difference. Whereas in the January 6th, you actually have to show an agreement between the people that are named in the complaint, in the criminal complaint.
Speaking of his comments, the former president's comments before he boarded that plane, we were speaking of it possibly violating the bond or not. What about Trump's free speech argument? Is this a case where he's okay to speak freely under the First Amendment?
We are going to see that, I think, in a motion to dismiss one or both of these cases relating to January 6th, the idea being it was free speech. We heard this after January 6th about his speech on the Mall. That speech on the Mall didn't make its way into either of these indictments. And I just have to refer to former Attorney General Bill Barr, who says every conspiracy involves speech. There are lots of crimes. Bribery, which is named in the Constitution as a basis for impeaching a president, that involves speech. So the First Amendment doesn't allow you to speak in a way that leads to a crime. We will hear that again. We can see talking points in the campaign trail. We can see things on social media. People can think my free speech rights, but legally the Constitution is actually doesn't just give us the right to speak in a way that crosses the boundaries of the criminal code at the federal or here the state of Georgia level.
So they can't use that defense. What about the Supreme Court? Let's talk about this possibly moving to the Supreme Court. Trump has said on Truth Social, his social media platform, that the Supreme Court should step in. How could that happen? And under what legal theory? And could it even happen?
You know, we talked earlier about Mark Meadows wanting to take the case from state court in Georgia into federal court. And I think what's going on here is kind of this broader argument that, listen, we were just acting as federal employees, president, chief of staff. We have authority under Article 2 of the Constitution, and there needs to be a lot of discretion for people to kind of make mistakes. And if we start criminalizing decisions by presidents and their closest aides, you are going to clamp down on the ability of the president to be commander in chief and run the country. That is sort of this broad presidential immunity argument. Donald Trump raised it in connection with the predecessor to the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, Cy Vance. He said when Cy Vance, that grand jury, tried to subpoena his private accounting records, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. He said, listen, that I'm immune from that subpoena because I'm president. I think we're going to see that kind of argument. And you know what, Stephanie, there aren't a lot of cases under the Constitution. There is no immunity expressed in the Constitution. It exists for members of Congress under the speech and debate clause, but not for the president. It's a very squishy area. And I think if it gets on appeal, which it should, and it probably will, the court would be hard pressed not to take that case because the stakes are so high and the law is so murky. And that, again, could kick this down these cases down the calendar, but also in a weird way, it gives it, once again, the Supreme Court, the conservative majority, 6 human beings that aren't elected and are there for life, tremendous authority to decide what could be ultimately the outcome of one or more of these cases relating to January 6th.
And some of those justices appointed by the former president. Three of them. And all of this happening as the former president intends to run for president again. So how does this case impact the presidency if he is elected? How does it impact the presidency and the Constitution?
You know, it's really hard to imagine what that would look like if, say, these cases, one or more, did go to trial before and he was convicted. There's nothing in the United States Constitution banning a president from serving even from a prison. Now, it's hard to imagine how you would do that with the Secret Service. Aaron Katursi was talking about having the detail in the Georgia Fulton County jailhouse and how strange that is and astonishing. I mean, I live outside of Washington, D.C., and you see the motorcades and the Secret Service, and it's at this patriotic moment. Now we're seeing the opposite. When you say it's unprecedented, and we all say it, it really is sort of mapping out how this could turn out. It's like a TV show. It takes tremendous creativity to even come up with that scenario, and now we're living it in real time, and it's just really shocking and astonishing.
It really is the ultimate reality TV show that we are in. Thank you, Kim. Let's bring back former Georgia prosecutor Chris Timmons. Chris, you mentioned jury selection earlier and how it could play a really pivotal role in the prosecutor's case against the former president. Can you talk a little bit about that as we watch the former president take off from Atlanta?
Absolutely. So the key to any trial, just like the key to any decision, is the decider. And so in a trial, the decider is the jury. And so jury selection in all 4 trials are going to be crucial. Matter of fact, it's one of the most important aspect. Actually, it's the most important aspect of a trial. I teach jury selection at Georgia State University College of Law here in Atlanta. I think one of the things that we saw earlier, and you can tell from this, that this whole Donald Trump is being treated like anybody else. And I think that's a theme that the prosecution is going to use at trial. I think that they're going to say to the jury, hey, I know that this man used to be the president of the United States, but you need to treat him just like anybody else. I think we're going to hear that over and over again when we get to trial. And so what they're going to be looking for when we come to jury selection is they're going to be looking for jurors who are going to be receptive to that message, the message that Donald Trump is just like anybody else. And so when it comes down to it, that's what they're looking for. Now, the problem is when it comes to jury selection as well, when you're the prosecution, you've got to get it right. You've got to be 100% right. Because if you end up with even one not guilty vote in your jury, you are going to have to try that case all over again. You've got to get 12 people. They've all got to agree unanimously that Donald Trump is guilty. And the analogy that I use when I'm talking to my clients about the possibility of going to trial is this. We can't get 12 people to agree on a pizza topping. We can't get 12 people to agree on a restaurant reservation. So I don't know how in the world we get 12 people to agree on guilt or innocence in a criminal trial. And add the level of magnitude to this, as well as just the cognitive bias you see in the general public. Most people have already got their minds made up. And at this point, we haven't seen a single shred of evidence. I've heard people who hate Donald Trump saying that he's going to be convicted based on all the things that the evidence that's out there when we haven't seen any evidence. We've only seen an indictment. And I've heard people out there who said even if they prove it, they're not going to find him guilty because they don't want to have Joe Biden as their president. And so the key to any decision is the decider. And in this case, it's going to be the 12 people who are selected in Georgia to make a decision on the guilt of the former president.
And we have seen the former president's plane just take off from Atlanta, headed toward Newark Liberty International Airport. Thank you so much, Chris. I want to turn to Olivia Rubin. Olivia, what do you think is the ripple effect when we see the former president's mugshot? What ripple effect will that have on his campaign?
Well, really, Stephanie, like I sort of laid out a little bit earlier, I think this is going to become one of the central pieces of the campaign over at least the next couple of days. We can expect that they are going to galvanize it. They are going to sell T-shirts of it, sell mugs of the mugshot, because really that is one of the only things that they can do here. There are really, as we have seen Donald Trump on the campaign trail now with 4 indictments, there is no running away from the reality of his legal troubles. So what we have seen from the former president when he gives the speeches, when he is at his rallies, doing his events, is that he makes the indictments and his legal troubles part of his campaign. It has become a central slogan when you hear him say, I am being indicted for you. They are coming after me because they want to come after you, and I stand up for you. So the indictments and the mugshot that I'm sure we will see soon is something that we can expect to be brought in. And as I said earlier, I did ask, one of those people close to the former president what they expect to make of the mugshot. How are they going to handle it? And the answer was very point blank, very blunt, make money off of it, Stephanie.
And we heard from the former president before he boarded his plane saying kind of the standard lines that we've heard him say before, that the 2020 election was rigged. He thanked his supporters, saying he did nothing wrong. How do you think that helps him or hurts him? It seems as though he's not refraining from saying those statements, but instead repeating those same lies. How does this help his campaign?
Well, I think, quite frankly, what we have seen with every single indictment is that the former president has gone up in the polls. And that is something that his campaign loves to tout over and over again, because like I said, they make this part of their campaign. So publicly, they say that it is making him stronger in the polls. And it is something that they are using to make money because they are, quite frankly, running out of money. But I think what we started to see last night, at least at the debate that the former president did not attend, is some of the candidates starting to say we need to move past 2020 because, and you heard John Santucci say it earlier, that the former president is stuck in 2020. And many of the candidates said this is not a winning strategy for any Republican trying to take back the White House in 24 to be stuck in 2020, because what we need to be thinking about, these candidates said, is thinking about 2024. So clearly something that at least some of the other candidates would love to move beyond, because it is just a losing strategy, as they say, across the board for them.
Absolutely. And some of those candidates still saying that they would support him. Olivia, thank you so much. Speaking of John Santucci, want to bring him back in. Former President Trump reacted to his booking at the Fulton County Jail, calling it a sad day. And as we mentioned earlier, John also saying that it was a rigged election. Of course, he thanks his supporters, but he was defending himself. But again, saying that it was a rigged election despite there being no evidence. We haven't seen his support drop. Olivia just mentioned that since the first indictment. What do you make of all of this? The former president presenting himself once again in the same way.
Yeah, and I think Olivia touched on it perfectly just a couple of moments speaking to you, Stephanie, that Donald Trump believes that talking about the 2020 election is a way for him to get reelected in 2024. The poll numbers so far seem to suggest that. I mean, the average is at least 40 points above the closest person to him, which at the moment is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. So Donald Trump is not going to back down from this playlist. In fact, he's going to keep it going and put it on repeat every time he is out on the campaign trail. It is the mantra. It is the slogan. And we know one of the things that Donald Trump and his aides have been waiting for with this mugshot, when it gets released eventually, is to take it and print it and put it everywhere. Hats, t-shirts, you name it. They are going to use this as a fundraising vehicle, because they believe that if they lean into everyone out to get Donald Trump, you need to support him to stop this. This is a way for Donald Trump, again, he believes, to get reelected.
And as you said, definitely leaning in, not taking this opportunity to avoid the cameras or say something just opposite of what he said. John, do you think that the other co-defendants are on board with the former president? The former president getting out there to say that, sticking with his same lines. What do you think the other co-defendants are feeling right now?
Well, I think you don't even have to guess. Some of them have come out publicly and said that they stand by Donald Trump. Look at Rudy Giuliani yesterday, Stephanie, outside of that jail, forcefully defending his actions, forcefully defending his longtime friend of nearly 40 years, Donald Trump. So I think for some people, it's clear they're by Donald Trump's side, but others are trying to separate, are not in communications with the former president. Some have already filed motions to move this to federal court, hoping to separate themselves from Donald Trump's defense. One of the things that we remember, because history does repeat itself here, we've covered this before. One of the things I remember covering Special Counsel Mueller's investigation, the first special counsel to look into Donald Trump, was a joint defense agreement. That is between all the parties that are involved working together. We have not seen anything like that form yet. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but that would signal that everybody's in this together. So far, there is no indication, Stephanie, that that is going to happen. And one of the concerns that I know from speaking to close allies to Donald Trump is that they are highly concerned that any of these 18 individuals could flip. And don't forget, those are the 18 known. We have in this lengthy indictment from DA Fani Willis at least 30 unindicted co-conspirators. Don't know what they have, don't know of anything else they could give, but obviously Donald Trump and his team trying to make sure that everybody right now stays on Team Trump.
John, this is just consistently unfolding. Thank you very much. Let's bring back former Georgia prosecutor Chris Timmons. Chris, could the district attorney, Fani Willis, face opposition for pursuing this case?
I think she will. And I think that that's going to happen. And she'll have opposition in the primary next May. I don't think that they're going to run a Republican against her. They might, but they're definitely going to find some sort of Democrat to run against her, who will probably be backed by folks from the Republican Party in secret. And I think that's a concern. When I was in DeKalb County, which is next door, I was a prosecutor there. It includes a portion of Atlanta. My boss was running two, at least locally significant cases. And in those cases, at the time that he was doing them, he faced a lot of pressure from the community asking him, why are you pursuing these two high-profile cases when we've got murders, we've got car break-ins, we've got quality of life crimes that are going on that the public perceives as being ignored. And so she's vulnerable there because she's running two giant cases, both RICO cases, one the Young Thug RICO case, and the other the Donald Trump case. And the really interesting thing would be is if she got beat before the trial was over. If you just run against Fani Willis, if you ran on the platform of she's spending too many resources on these two big high-profile cases, there's probably going to be some pressure on you to dismiss the case, which could happen mid-trial. I know that's a disaster scenario. I think it's wild, but that's something that we should be considering as we move forward in these uncharted waters. They could get even more. I don't know how you get less charted, but certainly we are in uncharted waters, and they just keep getting murkier.
Absolutely. We're constantly surprised. All right, Chris, thank you so much. I want to turn back to Aaron Katersky. We just received a statement from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department. Tell us about it, Aaron.
Not only the statement, but we also now have the mugshot of former President Trump glowering into the camera as he was booked on 13 criminal charges here in Fulton County. The sheriff confirming the booking in a statement just issued from his office, saying this evening, defendant Donald J. Trump surrendered to authorities at the Fulton County Jail. Mr. Trump's bond order and stipulations are the result of negotiations between the district attorney's office and his attorneys. And we know the bond agreement was for $200,000. He worked with a local bail bondsman to post the 10% required before he was allowed to be released on bond. He was in and out of this jail in about a half an hour, a little less, far less time than it takes the typical criminal defendant here. But now the mugshot is out, and the former president has been booked, and he's on his way back to New Jersey, Stephanie, after he was on the ground, an hour and a half or so. So the next time he's expected back here is supposed to be the week of September 5th. Unlike many jurisdictions, when the booking and the arraignments take place simultaneously, here, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis says his arraignment to enter a plea to the charges doesn't have to take place for another 2 weeks. We'll see what the judge says about that. But whenever that does occur, there will be cameras allowed in court. So we're going to see this entire criminal prosecution unfold before us on TV.
Absolutely. And you mentioned those charges, those 13 charges. I want to go through them quickly. One of them being violation of the Georgia RICO Act, solicitation of a violation of oath by public officer, conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer, and so forth. As we mentioned, 13 state charges. We just received the former president's mugshot. We want to show that to you here in just a moment. As we get that set up for you, let's bring in John Santucci.
Yeah.
John, do we think the former president will weaponize this image to help him with fundraising? You mentioned this earlier, but to what point, and will it work in gaining support for his 2024 campaign?
Stephanie, I'm going to throw it back to you because I see what we have on screen right now.
Yes, we do. We have the mugshot. There is the former president's mugshot taken at the Fulton County Jail earlier this evening as he was indicted for the 4th time there in Georgia. Right now, the former president is in the air on his private plane heading back to Newark Liberty International Airport. But that is his mugshot taken today at the Fulton County Jail. John, let's talk about this mugshot and how his team may possibly use this to fundraise. And here's the bigger question, though. Will it even work?
Well, actually, Stephanie, I'm going to take that in a bit of a different direction because, as you well know, I've covered Donald Trump for ABC News for nearly a decade. And that image, seeing Donald Trump, to the obvious viewer, Donald Trump is very clearly angry. But when I saw the image just a couple moments ago, it reminded me of Donald Trump's book cover that he released in 2015. The book was titled, I believe, Crippled America. And I remember saying to Trump, after seeing the cover, I said, gee, you really look angry. And they said, well, they told me to arch my brows, to look angry, just to stare down the camera. That's that Donald Trump that we see right now. And that's not Donald Trump posing for a book cover. That is Donald Trump legitimately angry about where he is right now, and feeds in, Stephanie, to everything I have been hearing in the last couple of days, that Donald Trump has been raging about this indictment, raging against DA Fani Willis, raging about what could possibly happen, because as we know, these are severe charges, and many other people, as we've been reporting here on ABC, concerned about what will happen because of so many people indicted with him And as one aide said to me, if one flips against us, we have a gigantic problem. But to go back to your question earlier about what he's going to do with it, copy, paste, print. They're going to put this on every possible campaign t-shirt, hat, and mug, you name it. I would wait for the moments until a fundraising email comes out with this mugshot. And the one thing that we do need to recognize, there's Donald Trump bravado that everybody sees, and there's Donald Trump personal. People you don't see. Obviously, we all have that, right? Our public face, our private face. Though Donald Trump is going to go out there and say, look at this, can you believe it? Not a bad shot, etc. This is not a photo that Donald Trump personally is loving right now, Stephanie.
So you don't think this was an intentional pose? Because when we look at the other mugshots, John, I'm sure you've seen the other ones of the other co-defendants. Some are smiling, some are neutral. This seems, I mean, you could see that he's angry, but do you think this was somewhat intentional, given the fact that he may use this photo in on products as he moves toward in his campaign?
You know, I try to get in Donald Trump's head. That is a dark art. I definitely do try to do it. That's what I'm paid to do most times here at ABC. But, you know, Donald Trump has definitely been angry about it for sure. But I don't think Donald Trump was standing there saying, is this going to look good on a T-shirt? I think Donald Trump is standing there saying, get me out of here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this right now. So I think that is more of what's weighing on Donald Trump tonight, Stephanie, than anything else.
Well, John, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us this evening. You've been watching ABC News Live Prime. We tonight just witnessed the former president, Donald Trump, being booked and released from the Fulton County Jail. A senior advisor to the former president tells ABC News that a mugshot, which we just saw there, was taken tonight at the Fulton County Jail. John and I just discussed it. We will be right back. I'm Stephanie Ramos. Stay with us. This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.